Switch. Chapter 1. Inside a long, dark tunnel approximately 100 feet below ground, I straddled a man in what probably looked like a lover's embrace. Well, except for my coiled fist ready to land another blow to his face, and maybe my just-uttered promise to gut him into next week if he didn't tell me what I needed to know. The man, who was definitely not a lover, twisted his mouth to the side before my punch connected. His bruised eyes glinted malice while realization inched its way through my skull. My fist hung near my head, forgotten. My lungs cemented together with a hiss. Shit. I flung both hands at his mouth, prying open his jaw, thrusting my fingers between gnashing teeth and over his slimy tongue. He bit down. Hard. Not on me, but on the cyanide capsule he'd likely wedged into a molar. Death happened instantaneously, cling-wrapping its haze over the man's dark eyes, sealing the location of the bomb he'd planted in the crowded subway station for good. Heaving a shaky breath, I dragged my fingers, wetted with the dead man's spit, down the front of his black shirt. According to the sharp-eyed Good Samaritans who'd called the Mystic City Police Department, he'd jumped down onto the subway's tracks carrying a backpack while wearing no indication of the Mystic City Metro's swish insignia. I hadn't seen any sign of that backpack, and after a quick search of his pockets, I didn't know who he was either. As I stood on liquid legs, I fumbled for my cell to call my commander, Ollie Lincoln, of the Mystic City Bomb Squad.
"You're off duty,"
he answered. Susan called when I was a block away from here. Susan was the department secretary and resident information leaker.
"Doesn't change that you're off duty."
Listen, your guy's dead. Cyanide capsule, no backpack, no nothing.
Son of a...
He breathed a clipped sigh.
Did he say anything?
No. I ran my tongue over the cut on my lower lip. But he did punch back. Is the station evacuated?
Getting there. But there are still some trains on the tracks.
I glanced down the tunnel in both directions. On the sides of the tracks were 1.5 wide platforms for service people, but in some areas, those platforms desperately needed repair. Yellow lights hung from the walls about every 15 feet, so if I slipped off the path onto the tracks about a foot below, at least I would be able to see my oncoming doom in the form of a subway train. Not how I pictured ending my Wednesday afternoon. I'll haul balls if I need to, I said.
What you need to do is get out of there and take a cab home. And don't step on the third rail of the tracks on your way out. It carries nearly 700 volts of electricity.
I spotted the murderous rail next to my right foot and swallowed. Might should have mentioned that first thing.
Right, sorry. Which entrance did you come in through?
7th and Arrow Streets. Voices in the background spoke words I couldn't make out. I pictured Ollie listening, a pillar of quiet strength, maximum level-headedness, and one eyebrow that quirked naturally higher than the other. That one eyebrow showed more emotion than the rest of his face, offering hints of doubt or anger if one learned to read its angle right. After 1 year of working under him, I had reached Eyebrow Master. His voice came over the line again, slowly, as if he carefully weighed each word.
There were more reports of people seeing others jump down onto the tracks with backpacks just seconds ago during evacuation. Officers went after them, and the shifters are on their way to help sniff out the threat. And Myla.
Yeah?
Some of the perps wore orange monster masks.
A strange sound clicked at the back of my throat, and I slumped my shoulders, dropping my cell to my side. I stared blankly in front of me, my mind scrambling to erase that day 5 years ago, but failing like it always did. It had been an orange monster mask then, too. I'd been a sophomore in college and engaged to the love of my life, Jack. We'd been on our way to pick out our cake for our shotgun wedding when a man dipped in shadows leaned out of a van in front of the bakery and aimed his gun at me. Because I was 30 weeks pregnant, and because that was just the kind of fae Jack was, he jumped in front of me and took the bullet. Amid the blood and chaos, I swore I saw a glimpse of an orange monster mask inside the van. My mind thankfully blanked after that, but I still knew how it ended. Jack dead, and me a shell of the person I used to be. A lot of violent attacks against pregnant Fae had occurred around that time, and some blamed the Barinth, a cult of witch radicals who believed the apocalypse was coming in the next 10 seconds, or the next 10 seconds after that. But nothing had ever been proven, and Jack's killer still walked free, leaving me to raise our daughter. I blinked down the empty tunnel. This was the Barinth. Again. It had to be.
Myla? Myla?
I brought the cell back to my ear. Yeah,
You need to get out of there.
Ollie said, his voice a low warning that almost made it hard to argue with him. Almost. Negative. If they have a bomb, I need to find it and defuse it. That's what I do.
This isn't open for discussion.
Then we don't have to discuss it, I hissed. It's the Barinth, Ollie. I ended the call, silenced the phone, and shoved it into my back pocket. Only one person I knew could push Ollie into a rage, and every time I did, his quirked eyebrow slipped low while his flinty gray eyes narrowed into lethal points that drilled into my skull. He could fire me, use my dead body parts for a subway rat feast. The only thing that mattered to me was stopping the Barinth before they destroyed someone else's life. I stepped over the dead man toward the narrow service path, my ears burning for sounds other than my echoing footsteps and the thud of memories against my skull. Memories I didn't have the strength or the time to sort through right then. That would come later with terrifying clarity while I slept in an empty bed. My daughter Renya was the only bright part of my life. She'd helped me through a dark depression after she'd been born, and as she grew older, I loved noticing her different mannerisms and whether they'd likely come from me or Jack. She'd definitely got her love for assigning odd names to things from me. For example, she called pizza crusts pizza bones, and she called me super special. It was hard to be down in the dumps when she called me that with her little helium voice. The tunnel curved. I slid my back against the wall and followed it, my fingers twitching where my gun should be. I never took it home with me because I couldn't stand the thought of Renya accidentally getting a hold of it. Guns in general weren't my favorite thing. No one lurked in the straightaway ahead as far as I could tell, but there was a toaster-shaped box up ahead attached to the wall. I recognized it immediately as a sort of computer that tested the air for chemicals or gases that shouldn't be there. In the event of a chemical bomb, this computer would trigger a warning to the authorities as well as a fluorescent spray. So far, it was just a boring tan color, which was great news since I wasn't wearing a protective suit. Where had the dead man stashed the backpack he'd jumped down here with? As far as I could see, there weren't any nooks or crannies large enough to hide something that size. A soft rumble crept under my feet, slow and then building. A train was coming, but the conductor had had plenty of time and opportunity to stop and unload its passengers before now. Unless it wasn't able to stop. I plucked my cell from my pocket, the whole tunnel vibrating around me, and hit speed dial for Ollie. The light from the oncoming train swept along the curved wall at the next bend. "Ollie!" I yelled into the phone, though I couldn't be sure if he'd even answered yet. The train appeared, and a great roar crowded my eardrums as it sped toward me. I had plenty of room for it to go by safely, but still, I pancaked myself against the wall and dug my fingers into its crevices. It dashed past, the faces of its passengers blurring into shapeless beings. My elemental magic growled in hunger when it detected them. After Jack's death, when I'd been at my darkest, I'd thought I'd lost my magic, aka Benny. Like Raina had dubbed me super special, I'd nicknamed my magic Benny when I was a kid. Benny was easily pliable to my wishes and drew from all 4 elements with no trouble. But he must have grieved Jack's death too, because when he finally came back to me, he'd changed. He was wild, starving, and he refused to do anything without first sponging magic off of other elementals. If I didn't let him feed, I'd get massive headaches that would feel like they were splitting open my skull. "Okay, Benny, go," I sensed him move toward the passing train like an invisible vine with teeth. He tasted and prodded, then whipped back all four elements into my magic reserves. If my theory was correct about that train, the passengers likely wouldn't mind a little thievery if they walked off of it alive.
Myla, answer me.
Ollie shouted as soon as the train had passed and I could hear again. Why is there still a train going down here?
There's 3.
He said.
All taken hostage, all running in a loop at top speed.
Damn, I swallowed roughly. This keeps getting worse.
Why aren't you?
I hung up. If he asked why later, I would blame the tunnels or my sketchy cell service. I didn't have time for another lecture. Neither did the passengers taken hostage on the 3 trains. Pocketing my phone, I stepped lightly over a small fissure in the path and kept going, knowing I had 2 more trains to look forward to before I met the first one again, which meant I needed to act fast to get a good reading. I sent out my newfound earth magic deeper into the tunnel to detect the slightest vibration on the ground, caused by rats, people, trains, and everything in between. But Benny went stupid. He crashed into the ceiling like a drunken, well, Benny. Chunks of concrete and dust hailed down, pelting my head and arms when I threw them up to protect my head. "Stop! Bad, Benny!" I scolded as I curled inward and folded into my injuries. One particularly violent piece of ceiling had struck my pinky. The cave-in stopped, and Benny slipped back to me with his invisible tail between his legs. "Let's try this again, okay? Follow the direction of my swollen pinky." Slowly. He burrowed under the rails, bouncing every shifting dirt noise he made back to me over our psychic connection. Farther and farther he went underneath the ground, picking up a faint scratching, then 8 legs skittering and worms worming. There, around the next curve, maybe 20 yards ahead. Soft footsteps, and they were coming toward me. Benny could only pick up sound vibrations in his current location, not whether the footsteps belonged to friend or foe. With the tunnel lights splashing yellow all over my skin and nowhere to go, I would definitely be visible to any backpack-carrying Baranth, and I wasn't yet sure I wanted to be. "Benny, you're going to come back and change me into a puddle until those footsteps pass, and then you're going to change me back. That's the most important part, Benny. Change me back." Like a quill in an inkwell, he dipped into my water reserve. I exploded into water droplets as if I'd been ejected out of a fireman's hose. I shot straight up, but what goes up must come down because gravity is stupid. I splatted in the middle of the tunnel in a collection of gathered drops, on a slight incline and dripping, precariously close to the electrified 3rd rail. Water plus electricity equaled no more Myla. The approaching footsteps grew louder, just feet away. A long shadow slanted over me, its movement matching the pace of the steps. Puddle-Me stretched thin fingers toward the 3rd rail. There was nothing I could do to stop myself. Feet crunched over the narrow platform. I caught the figure's reflection as it passed. A backpack slung over one shoulder, a male stranger's face, and an orange mask in his hands. He glanced behind him, his eyes wide and scared, before pushing onward. 2 inches until I hit the 3rd rail. "Benny, let's go. Change me back." But nothing happened except for the slight tremble that jiggled my surface. Another train. 1.5 inches until the 3rd rail. If I didn't get out of here fast, the shaking ground was sure to hasten my slow crawl to crisped elemental fey. "Benny." The light rippling over my surface brightened. The light at the front of the train. It was coming fast. 1 inch, Benny. Change me back. At 1/2 inch to the 3rd rail, the spreading fingers of water turned into the flesh and bone of my hand. I snatched it to safety as the rest of my body reformed. The train rocketed toward me. I stood in the middle of the tunnel, my insides scurrying before the rest of me. I leaped to the service platform, seconds from becoming a puddle once again, only this time the dead variety, and squeezed my eyes shut while the passing train roared by. My life zipped through my head in snapshots of Renya at how close to death I'd just been. I'd learned a long time ago that feeling wasn't just some cliche, it was real. When the last car dashed by and the resulting wind snapped at my back, I fished out my phone and dialed.
Are you out yet?
Ollie asked. Suspect is heading west down the tunnel, I breathed. A pause while he relayed this information, then,
Are you all right?
never better. I swallowed the sour tang of a close call, my cheek still pressed to the cool stone wall. You?
Do you have eyes on any of our people yet?
He asked.
I sent a few to force you out of there since you're taking your sweet time.
Not yet.
Why is it taking you so long to get out?
I'm working on it, okay? I have short legs,
Take longer strides then.
he ordered, spoken like a tall person. He hung up and I stored my phone before continuing down the service platform, using the wall for balance as I leaped over several crumbling gaps. Up ahead, something dark was balled up into one of the spaces, something made of fabric and not concrete. A backpack. I stopped, scratching my fingernails over the rough wall. I didn't dare pick it up since I had no idea what was inside. If it contained a bomb, the slightest jostling could be my undoing. Sure, I could stash it into one of several bomb containment trash cans placed around the subway station for one of the other bomb techs to deal with in a protective suit. I could also wait for backup, but if whatever was inside had a timer, I could be screwed. The guy I'd seen had been coming away from this backpack, even though he'd had another one, which could have explained why he was hightailing it quickly. The zipper around the middle was already undone. Without knowing what was inside it, I wouldn't know the best course of action. I had to open it, just enough to peer inside. I knelt and dipped my fingers between the zipper's teeth. Empty, except for an orange mask.
Hey,
A male voice rolled down the tunnel and back again. I froze. I didn't recognize that voice, but I wasn't used to hearing anyone's voice with an echo behind it. Maybe I knew them. Maybe I didn't. But if I turned around to look, they would see my face. A friend's face, or the enemy's face. Only one way to find out. I plucked the mask out of the backpack, secured it over my head, and tucked my long black ponytail inside. As I adjusted it to my face, I stood and turned. A man, a stranger, walked up the opposite side of the tunnel. He wore all black, his steps nearly imperceptible, moving like a shadow. He had a similar backpack slung over his shoulder.
why aren't you at the rendezvous point?
He narrowed dark, beady eyes at me, his sharp gaze hopefully not snagging on the fact I wasn't who I pretended to be. Luckily, I was also wearing all black, and my winter coat bulked me up some. My voice, however, was too feminine. I'd tried to growl out male voices before during Raina's story times, but they only made her giggle. The man waited expectantly, not even close to a giggle. Benny. Thin the air enough around him to almost make him pass out and hear my voice as if it's a record played at too low of a speed. Got it? This idea would probably bite me in the ass, but it was all I had. I didn't want No Giggle to really pass out because I wanted to know where the rendezvous point was. But if I tackled him to the ground like the last guy, he'd probably bite down on a cyanide capsule, too. I needed him alive and conscious. At least mostly. A sucking noise sounded, drinking in some of the man's air until it was as if he stood on the tallest mountain. I guessed, anyway. I didn't actually see Benny or the air. I got lost, I said. I couldn't find the rendezvous. To me, my voice sounded normal. I only hoped Benny hadn't made me sound like a demon from the depths of hell. No Giggle nodded and stumbled slightly, his gaze probably unable to focus on any one thing. Enough, Benny. You thinned the air enough? As the man gestured for me to follow him, I picked up the empty backpack. The man sank his eyes closed, inhaled deeply, then dropped to one knee with his hand touching the wall. A red glow sizzled behind his fingers as he trailed them up, across, and down in a door shape.
We can get there through here.
No Giggle said. The wall between the glow vanished, and the man disappeared into the darkness beyond. I wiped my clammy palms down my thighs and followed. Unofficially, temporarily, I'm not the bad guy Lee switching teams. Chapter 2. Beyond the doorway, we stepped into a drafty room with a carpeted floor and a long table in the middle. A red brick fireplace lit the other side of the room, while shadows writhed across the floor where I stood. We didn't appear to be in the subway station unless they had exchanged maps and signs with terrible artwork. Paintings hung on the walls of witches I didn't recognize, some with enough warts to make me rethink everything I'd ever eaten. Rolled across the table's length were blueprints of the subway tunnels and a folded-out map of Mystic City. Hundreds of red locator dots hovered over the map, some of them sparking with magic as they followed a moving target. So why were the Baranth cult targeting several unfortunates in the city if they were sneaking around subway tunnels? Was whatever they had planned in the subway going to serve as a distraction? I tried not to stare at any one thing for too long as we strode deeper into the room to make it look like I'd been here before. No Giggle sat with a sigh in front of the subway blueprints and leaned over them while I casually made my way to the fire.
Any trouble switching yours on?
He asked. I shook my head, my mask shifting across my face. There hadn't been anything with a switch to turn on, not something I'd seen anyway. Where were these bombs? Sweat broke across my skin. I knelt in front of the fire and held my hands out toward it just for something to do with my back turned. A door behind me and to my right opened.
Hazel Baranth's prophecy is actually quite specific compared to most of hers.
A brittle male voice said.
We know the location. We know the age. Hazel even knows their handwriting and the color of their hair, though they could have dyed it.
But we don't know what they'll do. Not specifically.
A woman said. All of this for Hazel Baranth's prophecy? She was supposedly the leader of the Baranth witch cult. Most prophecies never came true anyway, so why all the trouble? My ears burned to hear everything over the crackling fire.
Only that their actions could doom the whole world,
the man said with a sharpened edge.
I think that's quite enough.
I just wish we'd been successful last time. All of this, it just seems like a waste. All of that potential witch talent in Mystic City, gone because of a stupid fae.
I jerked my hands back from the flames as if they'd been bitten. A witch prophecy about a fae, a stupid one at that, who could doom the whole world. Pretty sure that was a first, since it was usually witches who dabbled in dark, destructive forces.
Well, at least we won't be targeting them one by one and missing more times than not. Now we'll be certain they're dead.
And everyone else in Mystic City.
A heavy stone rattled through my awareness, skimming off their words until they hailed down on top of me with the weight of their meaning. Sweat filmed my palms. Everyone else. Dead. They were planning to wipe out Mystic City because of some ridiculous prophecy. A loud exhale shook from my mouth and I froze. Gazes scraped up the back of my neck, curious and sharp. What would they do to me if they looked too closely at me or even peered underneath my mask? If they were insane enough to destroy an entire city because of one fae, they would have no trouble throwing me into the literal or proverbial fire. I flexed my hands and stood, readying myself to run or punch a witch out, possibly both at the same time. On top of the fireplace mantel were several goblets of all shapes and sizes, some encrusted with jewels and others rimmed in gold. So I feigned fascination with them while I waited for the tension to ease behind my back. A few of the goblets were filled with eyeballs and what looked like cut-off warts. I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing I could be anywhere else that wasn't swimming in witch warts.
The switches are set, sir.
No Giggle said from the table.
They'll trigger in 15 minutes.
15 minutes? I had 15 minutes to break out of this room and find the switches before Mystic City was torn apart by some prophecy. I couldn't even call Mom and tell her to get Renya as far away from here as she could. Not in front of these witches. Helplessness gritted my teeth. My throat knotted as tears spilled down my cheeks. Benny, I need a fiery distraction. slide underneath the door those two just came through and burn something. A moment later, loud thumps came from behind the door like demonic footsteps, not fiery sounds at all.
What the hell was that?
The woman demanded. The three of them dashed from the room. I darted toward the table and scanned the subway blueprints, but they didn't tell me anything new. Then I raced to the door that hopefully still led to the subway tunnels, but the map of the city stuttered my steps. There were too many locator dots to try to decipher who the real target was. Still, I flashed my gaze around the city just in case. Several precious seconds whisked by, and I knew I was wasting time, until I pinned my gaze on Mom's street where Rengna and I lived. A red dot hovered above her house. I blinked again, and it was still there. Panic swelled through my chest and thinned the air from my lungs. Another over the Kane's house next door, and another down the street at the Bartholomew's. What did those houses have in common? Faze lived in all of them, but that was true of the entire block. None of us had swimming pools, but we did have fenced-in backyards with swing sets. Children, all age 5. I backed away from the table, my stomach churning.
We know the location. We know the age.
That man had said, 5-year-olds, all across Mystic City. Every single person here was about to die because of one 5-year-old fae in Mystic City who had been prophesied to doom the world.
I just wish we'd been successful last time,
the woman had said. These witches had tried to stop the prophecy already. They'd targeted pregnant fae and had killed Jack in the process. I wrenched the door open and stumbled back into the subway tunnels just as a train whipped by. The air slapping my face and the roar helped clear my head a little, though my eyes were still blinded by tears. I fished my phone from my pocket, hit speed dial, and edged down the service platform, searching for anything that resembled a switch.
Hey, you!
Mom answered, her voice bubbly as if she'd just finished a laugh.
When are you?
Mom, I need you to... Fingers clenched around mine and ripped the phone away. It cracked against the opposite wall of the tunnel, and pieces of it flew down to the tracks. I could almost hear Mom back at home with the phone pressed to her ear, the constant loving smile she wore pinching at the corners and then fading while Rengna, her black hair framing her rosy-cheeked face, tugged at her shirt. Now I couldn't tell her to take Rengna someplace safe. I couldn't call Ollie either. A gruff hand whirled me around and smashed my shoulder into the stone wall. It was no giggle, his face streaked with soot. He jabbed a finger into my masked face.
Who were you calling?
Something inside me snapped. The mama bear that lurked inside all mothers growled her way to the forefront as fast as a flip of a switch. I tore off my mask, letting him see my bared teeth. I snatched the man's finger and bent it at a wrong angle. "Where are the switches?" He cried out and twisted to get away, a distraction from his other fist sailing at my face. Sharp knuckles buried deep into my nose. Pain exploded. Blood spurted. He wormed out of my grasp and darted back to the open doorway in the wall that led to the mystery room. I tumbled after him, snagging his shirt sleeve, and threw him off balance onto the tracks below. He landed in a heap, his head dangerously close to the third rail. I jumped down after him, ready to give him a nut punch since he seemed to be having trouble remembering the locations of the switches. But a sudden thought slowed my steps. He probably had a cyanide capsule lodged between his teeth, too. He could kill himself, and everything I lived for would be finished. How to keep him from doing that, though? He lay there, stunned, but he lifted his head as I stalked toward him. He waved his fingers, and a bolt of red shot from his palm. I dodged it, in no mood for a flipping light show. But a lightning show I could get on board with. "Benny, if he tries to bite down, give him a shock." No Giggle scrambled to all fours and Crab walked away.
Oreda bon.
I kicked his legs out from under him, dropping him to his back and temporarily silencing whatever spell he was about to spew. "Tell me where the switches are." The deadly threat in my voice rattled shivers up my own spine. He opened his mouth either to spell me or bite down, not to answer. He made that clear with his glare. Benny. When he didn't streak an electric shock toward No Giggle, I crouched over the man's chest, and for the second time today, I shoved my hand into a mouth. Hazard pay. I didn't have enough. He chomped down on my knuckles. Tears sprang to my eyes, and I howled. Benny! A red birthday balloon drifted over my shoulder. I stared at it, wondering if the pain in my hand was causing me to hallucinate or if I'd fallen down a rabbit hole into some horror story. No Giggle's eyes widened as the balloon lowered toward his head. Its rubber shell creaked and groaned as it shriveled in on itself and then wormed its way down my fingers and into his mouth. A second later, it twisted back out and floated toward the electrified third rail. The balloon popped, and the man's voice floated out of it in a pink helium thought bubble charged with silvery blue sparks.
On the front of the trains.
I jerked as if I'd been hit in the face. The switches were on the front of the trains. I tore my hand free from the man's mouth. Benny, you're a genius. No Giggle would have never offered that up on his own, and even if he did, it might have come too late. I probably had about 10 minutes left to collect the switches and figure out how to turn them off before they detonated and destroyed my life, and thousands of others. My best guess was that the switches triggered bombs that would carry a highly toxic chemical gas, and the speeding trains would flow the poison up to the station and then outside. It was a cold, blustery day, so the wind would take care of the rest. But how would I get the switches off 3 hijacked, fast-moving trains in less than 15 minutes? The ground rumbled. A train was coming. Think.
You'll never make it.
No Giggle rasped.
You'll die, too.
I leaned over his face so he'd be sure to hear me over the approaching train. You don't know me at all. I leaped to my feet and backed away from him up the tracks. His mouth fell open as he looked behind him, then back at me.
You're crazy.
Right. I was the crazy one in this entire situation. Who was it that drank the cult Kool-Aid and wanted to blow up a whole city because of some whack job's prophecy about a 5-year-old fae again? The train's headlight arced across the wall from around the corner about 200 feet ahead. Soon, the train would appear and would barrel down upon us. Think. The man scurried to his feet and raced to the service platform, but I hardly noticed. Benny, you have to listen to me and do what I say, otherwise I'm dead. You're dead. Raina is dead. Everyone is dead, you hear me? The train rounded the corner. Sweat tracked down my sides. Urgency bit at my feet. Turn the front of that train to water and then reform it as soon as I pass through it inside. But don't turn the switch to water, that's mine. The train blared its horn. The conductor sat on my right, so I shifted left. A witch in an orange mask stood behind him. No sign of anything resembling a switch on the front of the train. Less than 100 feet and eating up the rest of the distance fast. And then you'll have to let me out again by turning a wall or something to water. You'll have to listen to me, Benny. Less than 50 feet away. The impulse to run to either side flooded every cell in my body. My brain screamed to move. I tensed and resisted. I wished I knew if Benny understood what to do because now was not the time for improvisation. 10 feet. A red light blinked on something that had the dimensions of a shoebox underneath the window. That had to be the switch. Raina's face flashed in front of my eyes since she was my whole world, the entire meaning behind my life. If I died, it was to protect her. Benny. My hands quaked as I reached toward the box just inches away. Now! Chapter 3. Water exploded into me so hard that it must have spun me about. I wasn't disoriented enough to lose my sense of up, though. I jumped so my feet would find the train floor instead of the tracks. And then I was inside the train carrying the switch in my arms like a football. I had it. The train's momentum crashed me into the control room door headfirst. I bounced off and crumbled to the floor while dark spots crowded behind my eyelids. A crackling sound snapped my eyes open again. The front of the train had morphed from water to an ice block. Blue tendrils of it webbed across the floor, walls, and ceiling, freezing everything. How do you quickly change the inside of the train to water to get back out? By turning the whole thing into a speeding block of ice. Okay, Benny, sure. A cold breath puffed the air, but it didn't come from me because I hadn't started breathing again yet. I glanced up. The conductor and the masked witch behind him both gaped at me and then at the ice spreading quickly around them. Blue tendrils reached out from a control panel and climbed across the witch's gun gripped in his outstretched hand. It cracked open down the length of the middle, and each half clattered to the floor. I skated my legs underneath me until they found purchase, facing me toward one side of the train. Right here, Benny! Now! I lunged. The toe of my boot tapped against a solid ice wall while the rest of me hung in midair seconds behind it. Blue tendrils ripped the wall apart. Rippling fluid waves hovered in front of me, and I splashed through, off the train and into the wall next to the service platform. While the train zipped past, I hugged the wall with one hand and shifted the black box in front of me. Next to the blinking red light was a silver switch. No other markings. Just a switch that was in the down position. If I flipped it up, I had to believe that would turn it off. If not, it would trigger the toaster-shaped computers along the platforms to detect the chemical gas and alert Ollie and the rest of the squad. But they may not realize that there were 2 more bombs down here. The train had carried me farther away from the second train, and after I retrieved the switch from it, I would be even farther away from the third. How much time did I have left? Not enough to stew for too much longer about how to turn this thing off. I flipped the switch. The red light stopped blinking. I loosed a breath, but that was the entirety of my relief. 2 switches left. I had Benny turn the ground to dirt using earth magic, quickly buried the box, and then had him turn it back to concrete again. The witches wouldn't be able to find it and turn it back on now. Benny, you're amazing. Anyone ever tell you that? No, I suppose not. I jumped onto the tracks again, avoiding the third rail. By now, the Barinth cult would likely know what I was doing. These next 2 trains would bring trouble, which meant I needed a double shot of preparedness. Fisting my hands, I marched down the tracks and swept my senses around the tunnels for any signs I wasn't alone. Soon, the ground trembled, and a headlight traced around the curved wall up ahead. Just like last time, Benny, even though I'd done this once before and miraculously survived, dread took root in my chest and spread icy tendrils into my limbs to weigh them down. 2 more times. Maybe in as many minutes. I had no idea how much time I had left. The train appeared and rushed toward me. I sped my pace toward it and shifted left away from the conductor and another masked figure behind him. Attached to the front of the train was a black box with a blinking red light. I readied my hands to snatch it. I lifted to the balls of my feet to jump. I pictured Raina's sweet face. Now! Like before, a great watery explosion engulfed me. The train's momentum flung me into the control room door. Ice formed over everything with a loud popping noise and split the witch's outstretched gun in half. But this time, as I leaned against the door to slide my feet underneath me, the switch tucked into my side. The witch placed a feminine finger to my temple. A memory, a thought that wasn't mine, left a slimy trail through all of my real ones to the forefront of my brain. In it, bursts of lightning zippered to the ground and highlighted a lone figure with long black hair standing in the middle of a fallen city that looked as if it had been torn apart from the ground up. Long black hair? No, it didn't mean anything. It was just a stupid prophecy. I shoved away from the witch and dove for the train wall. She caught my legs and I went down again. Her fingers clawed at my hands that clutched the switch.
Rayleigh's,
The witch began. I pushed one foot into her midsection and kicked her in the jaw with the other, spinning myself to all 4s, all 3s since I still held the switch. Now, Benny. The iced wall in the control room melted into slush. I flung myself out of the train and crashed into the wall above the service platform. While the train beat the air around my back as it whizzed past, I flipped off the switch. With Benny's help, I buried it beneath concrete like the one before. 1 more to go. I sagged against the wall to catch my breath, shivering, while my body's assault began to rip through my consciousness. On a normal day, I didn't run into too many walls, doors, and fists. Usually just the corner of the coffee table or the bottom of my bedpost with my pinky toe. I would definitely feel pain tomorrow. But at least there would be a tomorrow. I would make sure of it. The end of the train flashed by, so I jumped down onto the tracks again, my mind whirring. Even if the prophecy was real, which it wasn't, prophecies in general were flawed. There was such a thing as free will and snap decisions. My current situation was the result of a snap decision, so hello, I knew what I was talking about. None of us were on a predetermined path. That would be like doling out good and bad labels to babies, but life just didn't work that way. What I saw was a vision of some freaky-deaky lady's drug-induced trip. Nothing more. I raced down the tracks as fast as I could. Tension pierced my backbone with adrenaline-spiked tips. How much time did I have left? Soon the ground quaked, and the third and final train's headlight lit the tunnel. Last one, Benny, you're doing great. Everything happened just like the last 2 times. The monster-masked witch standing behind the conductor, the black box with the blinking red light. Now! I reached for it and jumped. Water blasted into me, but this time there wasn't a closed door to stop me. I barreled into the first train car with icy tendrils licking a slick path under my feet. The passengers screamed or scuttled away from the spreading ice. With my momentum and the slippery floor, my legs skated out from under me. I tumbled against the top of a seat, the ice-covered handhold attached to it catching me in the ribs. In the next seat over, a passenger sat with his back pressed against the wall. He stared with wide eyes as I hissed my way upright, hugging my arms against my side so my bruised or maybe even broken ribs wouldn't poke free. I brought my thumb to the switch. The door to the next train car opened, and there stood an orange-headed monster. It leveled a gun at my chest and fired. Chapter 4. The box zipped out of my arms and clattered to the floor several feet behind me. He'd shot the box. I risked a look since a bullet could just as easily trigger the poisonous fumes. Nothing hissed out of the bullet hole in the side, though, which meant absolutely nothing if the gas was clear. But it was on the inside of the train, not the outside. So good news for the rest of the city, but potentially bad news for me and everyone on this train. I took a step backward.
Don't you dare move.
The witch said.
You have no idea the colossal mistake you made.
Mistake? Heat seethed through my bones and quaked out with my words. You call trying to save an entire city because of a ridiculous prophecy targeting 5-year-olds a mistake? The witch ripped off her mask, revealing a shock of red hair and clumpy mascara, owling her eyes.
It's my prophecy, and I can assure you it's far from ridiculous. This fae will bring the end of the world.
So this was Hazel, then, if it was her make-believe prophecy. Benny, I need that box. Through the open door behind the witch, Benny appeared to be too busy spreading ice through the rest of the train. I didn't have time for chit-chat with a nut named Hazel. I would risk the next bullet to flip the final switch if it wasn't already too late. Maybe she'd miss. But she held the gun as if this wasn't her first showdown. Luckily, this wasn't mine either. With every cell in my body on high alert, I became nothing but movement. I spun around in the aisle and lunged for the box. 1 step, 2. The gun fired. Pain shattered into my left shoulder, but I kept going. I whisked the box up from the floor and flipped off the switch. Another blast from the gun, but this time I dodged behind the seat next to the man with his back pressed against the ice wall. Next to this guy, Benny, hurry! But the man morphed into Hazel. The ice wall next to her thawed to watery slush. I dove through it, but not before she touched a finger to my temple. An image slithered into my head of a note with torn edges written in a precise hand. The note read, SS, Benny is coming for me. I can't stop him. I'm sorry. I smashed into the wall above the narrow service platform, the final deactivated switch still in my arms, while the note singed into my memory, one grueling letter at a time. SS. Super special. It didn't make sense, and I was too tired to try. Was the note from Raina? But she was only 5. Future Rainia, then? Tears warmed my eyes as the last of the train swept by. I'd done it. Somehow I'd saved the city, but a trickle of unease soured any relief I might have felt. That, and my battered body. I stumbled as I turned, and my heel slipped off the edge of the platform. I plummeted to the tracks below at the same time a shout echoed down the tunnel.
Myla!
I knew that voice, but it usually sounded so much more pissed off when it was directed toward me. I dragged in breath after breath to answer Ollie, but my body wasn't responding to my wishes. Footsteps pounded toward me while lights discoed in twirling circles across my face. Then he was there, skidding on his knees and cradling my cheeks in his warm hands. He bent over me, the glow from a flashlight stressing the concerned angle of his one arched eyebrow.
Myla, what happened? Are you…
His gaze snagged on my shoulder, which hurt so much that it almost didn't seem a part of me anymore.
You've been shot?
My tears leaked to his fingertips at my temples. Everything's fine. He turned and shouted,
Holloway, I need medics down here. Now.
When he looked back at me, his face seemed paler, his gray eyes scouring the rest of me for more signs of injury.
The trains are stopping right now, but I'm not taking any chances with you. I'm going to lift you off the tracks, all right?
I nodded, and he gently scooped me up off the ground with little effort. As he laid me on the service platform, his phone rang. He frowned at the screen and then answered,
What? Oh, sorry, Mrs. Snow. Yes, but I'm not sure she's in any condition.
I took his elbow, a signal to give me his phone so I could talk to Mom.
She's right here.
He handed me the phone. Mom, I croaked.
It's Rainia.
She said, her voice tight.
She's inconsolable. She said a darkness, something terrible, crept up behind her and then was gone.
Benny is coming for me. I can't stop him, the note had read. Benny? Are you there? My magic had changed when I'd been at my darkest, an untrainable beast that had resisted my will. What if it was because it hadn't been mine? What if it had crept up behind me too? But if it wasn't mine, then whose was it?
Myla, are you still there?
Mom asked. What if the only reason Benny had helped me up to this point was to get past today, this point in time, so that Rainia lived and he could come for her later? What if Benny had fought my free will away from me so he could affect my daughter's destiny and mold her into his own dark intentions for the future? But no, it couldn't be. The prophecy was wrong because prophecies didn't exist. Benny, go shake the ground or something. Nothing happened. He was battle-weary, that was all. He was resting. Later, he would demand I steal other elemental phase magic. Then he'd be good as new. Everything would be fine. Wouldn't it?